Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
Gute Woche. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Arena Lights LLC and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKoyen Khan Olav Shalom. It's also in Schus and merit of Rabbi Zevi Cheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz, Le'edech Yomim V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. And now with events going on in Eretz Yisrael, it's also in Schus. Hashem protect all Tzahal, all our holy soldiers on the front lines who are defending the men, women, and children in Eretz Yisrael. The hostages should be returned, and Eden everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael, should be safe forever and ever. We are in chapter 17, Perek Yud Zayin in Tanya, and this is the first time we were introduced, besides the Sharblad, the cover page of Tanya, which the whole Tanya, as the Alter Rebbe says, miyusad on the pasuk Yikarev Elecha Davar Meid. Now he's actually explaining how. And the real emphasis is on the words. How could you say that it's Karev Elecha Davar Meid, that it's very accessible, very relevant to every person? Elecha. The Torah speaks to everyone. Torah is nitzchias. With a special question around Levavcha. Beficha and la say, be able to speak Torah, and that affects your actions, dibur ma'aseh, okay. That does not necessarily require it requires avodah, but it doesn't require any special level. But levavcha, like he said, is neged achusha lanu, counterintuitive, or it doesn't seem possible to every person because either you can feel or you don't feel. And he said, like, how can you expect a person she'ein karev meid hadavar to transform his heart from desiring the matters of this world to love God in a truthful way is not a simple matter. So he answered based on what we learned, that a Beini does not mean that someone who eliminates his nefesh habamis. It's someone who has it under control. And it doesn't even mean that he needs to have ava bezgalus libe, which means a passionate, fiery love. It's sufficient, like we learned in chapter 16, Ru'usa deliba shebetalumis lev. That dover zeh karev me'ed v'nakel lekol adam asher yesh le'meich b'kat kodei, because meiche bereshusei. Libam is bereshus tzadikim. Tzadikim control their hearts. A Beini may not control his heart, but he controls his mind. And since he can always contemplate as he wishes, so when he contemplates, it will inspire and will give birth in his mind, at least in his mind, a inclination to appreciating and understanding the importance of loving God. So therefore, and that memeiche, and since meiach yishalat ala lev, so and this is in other words the levavcha la say. So it's not a levavcha where he has the passionate love, but it's a levavcha that brings him to actions, which is the main thing. Ikara Adam Hayem La Seisam, Vamayach Shal B'Tiv V'Tedos Achol Asmali. The Mayach naturally dominates and controls the heart, the left side of the heart, and his mouth, and all his limbs. So as such, therefore, Karev Elecha Davar Meid also B'Levavcha. What is the Levavcha? At least minimum Levavcha La Seisei. So the Avodah is he couldn't reach the level, as we learned in chapter 16, of complete passionate love, but he can reach a love that is sufficient to appreciate, and worthy of loving God. And to the point that it brings him to actions, to la seise. And we discussed this in detail, the additional explanation of the Tzemach Tzedek and some of the Maimorim. The Ficha brings to B'Levavcha, meaning learning Torah is what helps me me'eder it. But we won't go over that. We've already done that in the past. The next section, however, okay, so fine, so we have two levels here. The tzaddik is libam bereshusam, which means they control their hearts and their emotions are completely in their control. A Beini is not libe b'reshusei, but it's also not the opposite, meaning Moich is b'reshusei, his mind, and therefore his Moich shalat al alev, his mind therefore can control his heart. So that's not controlling the heart directly, where the heart doesn't even have feelings of the animal soul, doesn't have feelings toward this world. Like he said, that a person has such types, but he has enough with the moyach and the ability to control it to create a b'lvavcha la'asesei. So what about the Rasha now? Since it says Karev Elecha Davar Meid is in the Torah, and Torah's nitzchis means it's for everyone at all times. So what about a Rasha? And so that same Maimar Chazal that says Sadafket Sadikim Libam B'Reshusam, the one that Alter Rebbe brought earlier. So far we explained the Beinani, but a Rasha is not a Beinani. A Rasha does not control Moyach Shalat Alev. And by the Rasha we take say Rishoyim Hem B'Reshus Libam. That's the opposite. That the wicked, the Rasha, is in the control of his heart. The heart controls the Rasha, not the other way around. Ve'en Libam B'Reshusam Klal, he emphasizes. And their hearts are not in their control at all. Like we explained, take, for example, an addict. The Rasha is not born a Rasha, obviously. But due to his bad choices, it has now become natural to him to follow his own desires, which means his heart's desires. And that's the exact definition of an addict. Someone that his heart, his impulses, let's put it that way, controls him. So what happens with a person like this? So the Alter Rebbe explains Imlei Mishu Rasha Be'emes, that this is talking about a Rasha Be'emes. So the word Rasha Be'emes means the Rasha V'raloi in the end of chapter 11. This is not a Rasha that is a Rasha V'tevlei, where there we know at times he does control himself, at times he doesn't. The Rasha Be'emes, that's where we say Rishus Libam. Ein Libam B'Rishusam Klal. Because you can't say that on a Rasha V'tevlei. A Rasha V'tevlei, you could say him B'Rishus Libam, their heart's desires and impulses affect them. But to say Ein Libam B'Rishusam Klal, we know Rasha V'tevlei does many good things. As a matter of fact, what would turn a Rasha into what would make someone a Rasha is even if he does one Aveda. Like he said in Perikut Beis, that a Beini is someone like Ovav Yavid. He never did an Aveda, never will do him. We explained what that meant. It's a state of being that he's in that state, that he's not capable. He defies any type of, we're talking about in thought, speech, and action. Not the heart. The heart desires. That he does not stop, but his mind can impose self-control and self-mastery, the natural control that it has. But by Rasha V'tevlei, all you need is one Aveda. So to say, Ein Libam B'Rishusam Klal, all the other times, you can't say that. So that's why the Alter Rebbe is saying, Hashem Hashiz Libam, Ein Libam B'Rishusam Klal, and that explains also why he emphasizes that it's not at all in their control, is Dafka the Rasha Be'emes. And it'll be explained based on what he said also in chapter 13, Emes refers to something that is through and through true, meaning all the time. So there it's used in a good way. By Rasha Be'emes means that generally speaking, he's not in his control. Now even an addict, for example, who's in control of his impulses, also we're not saying that there never has any ability to restrain himself. But overall, he's not in his control. That he says, "Ein libam b'reshusam klal." That's his state of being. So how do we understand this person? Didn't we say that a human being has natural self-control? So what happened here? So obviously, just because someone has the potential of natural self-control doesn't mean you exercise it. You have to bring it into action. Moich Shal Talev is an effort. And because this person this Rasha Be'emes has become used to and accustomed to just following his own habits, his own desires. So now the Alter Rebbe says, like an addict, at some point, his behavior has now taken control of him. And that's what he says, V'zeh einish al gedel ve'etzem aveinam. That it's a form of an einish. There's a penalty. You could say it's a consequence of such sustained behavior that is destructive, to the point that from heaven creates a situation where he can't exercise that self-control. Like we see, an addict needs special type of effort and special type of work to get beyond his addiction. And this is due to al-gedel ve'etzem aveinam. It's imposed due to the extent and magnitude of their sins. Now, why is it important to emphasize this? And the Rebbe actually makes it a point to say that this einish is not just as a result of cause and effect, that it's an einish guli, meaning it's an additional thing. It's not just a person puts his hand on fire and his hand gets burnt. So it's not just like an addict, that the behavior itself has caused it naturally. There's something from heaven, because the fact of the matter is, you don't see he doesn't lose control in every area of his life. There's other areas of life where he does control. Let's say how he manages money or how he runs his business. So the Rebbe says it's mashma from here that we're talking about the Inis Guli. It's not just he became a person that loses control entirely. We're talking about in the areas in Torah and mitzvahs, in good and evil, that's where he's lost his control. That in his Avedus Hashem, he cannot control himself. Okay. But now, okay, fine. So now we explained how Me'ech Shal Talav is not a contradiction, because this Rasha has in a sense excluded himself. So it's like every person. A person can be naturally born, for instance, with a certain immunity. But if you eat unhealthy foods for long enough, God forbid, you can destroy your whole immune system, or at least a part of that immunity. So even though naturally you would fight off certain diseases, but if you behave in ways, either through diet or lack of exercise, or just general destructive behavior, you could affect even your natural faculties. A person could cause such self-damage. There's still hope for this person, as we're going to learn. But we're talking now of someone who's gone beyond. So even that natural capacity, self-control, is something he hasn't done in years. So this einish l'mayla. Now, why does God punish him that way? There you can say it's because of his behavior, obviously. Like he says, al gedel aveinam. It is due. It's not just some, God forbid, random thing. It's a result of his behavior. But there's like an additional element coming from, besides just the natural cause and effect, an additional element. And one of the reasons you could say is in order to actually help him hit rock bottom so he can then begin to heal through tshuva, as we shall learn. But what about the pasuk Karev Elecha Davar Me'ed now? We still have to reconcile that. So fine, you say he's outside of the realm of Me'ech Shal Talav, but the pasuk says Karev Elecha Davar Me'ed, to every person Elecha B'ficha Ubelvavcha. And here, he doesn't have control over his heart has control over him, his impulses are controlling him. So how do we answer that? So here, the Alter Rebbe says, in other words, how could you say it's very much within his reach? V'lei dibra Torah b'meisim elu, sheb'chayim kruyim meisim. The Torah, and what Torah are we talking now? The pasuk Karev Elecha Davar Me'ed, and Torah in general does not talk about meisim. Elu sheb'chayim kruyim meisim. The Gemara in Brachos 18b says, Reshayim, wicked people, even in their lifetimes, they're called dead. Let's go back to the example of the addict. And the addict, in a certain way, is dead, emotionally dead. He's dead in his sensitivities. As you see, a person who's an addict and is not in any control of it, certain element of deadness in that, spiritually dead. And when we say life and death in Torah, it's not just biological. We're not talking about someone who's breathing, or his brain is functioning, his faculties are functioning. Life and death is spiritually life and death. That's why it says tzadikim gambe misas and kriyim chayim. Even when they're physically dead, meaning physically their souls and bodies have separated, they're still alive because what they represent. And their life was all about spiritual matters. Chaim ruchnim, not chaim psarim, as the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKedesh, Simon Chav Zayin. What does spiritual life mean? Their life was all about love and reverence and faith in God. That lives on. The legacy they left, the students they leave. So you see from that real chayas is holy life, is a sacred life. That's why v'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokechem chayim kulchem hayem. So though God gives biological life, even those that are not attached to Him, for the purposes of free will, however you explain it, but true life is by the person who's connected to Elokus. But a Rasha, especially we're talking about a Rasha v'raloi, a Rasha be'emes, the toiv in him is in the form of makif. It's like hovers. It's not internalized because he's become so controlled by his own hedonistic and selfish desires to the point that they control him. So that's why he's called like Mesim. Chayim Kruyim Mesim. And there the Torah does not speak about Mesim. Lei dibra Torah b'Mesim. In this matzav, as he is right now, in this situation, this Rasha be'emes is in a state, that's why Korav Elechem Adav B'mei does not apply to him. But we see clearly here that the Torah is speaking to a person that's alive. That person has some sensitivity, some awareness. He's come to a point of lack of awareness due to his behavior and the einish that he mentioned before. That now his Moich Shal Talev is essentially not effective. So therefore, the pasuk Korav Elechem Adav B'mei does not apply to him. Because he doesn't have control even over his dibur ma'aseh, let alone over his heart. Now, we have to explain, the Rebbe explains, this does not mean that never. There are times, sporadic times, that it's possible that he will do what he has to do. That's why even a Rosh Be'emes is responsible to do Torah mitzvahs. We don't say we've given up on him. He's still responsible. Because even after all, in Tanya, in the end of chapter 11, he said it's Tevis Makif. That's why he says Shchinta Sharyeh. But for example, Rosh Be'emes can be included in a minyan. He still has a neshama. However, the neshama is not affecting him. At least not in any revealed manner. So that's why we don't say Korav Elecha, but that's why Libam B'Reshus Libam. His desires are in control of him. But he's not fundamentally lost his neshama, God forbid. So then what do we mean? What does he mean then, the Lei Dibra Teira B'Mesim? We're saying they are responsible for Teira. So he's saying, focused specifically on the pasuk Korav Elecha Adav B'mei. Yes, he's responsible for doing Teira, but to say that it's Korav Elecha, that is very attainable, and very reachable, and very accessible, and very relevant to him, that, at this state, you cannot say. That's the key thing here. Because it's not the Levavcha is in his control, he's in control of his heart due to his actions, due to his behavior and the einish that came, that ultimately put him into that category. Okay. Now the Alter Rebbe continues and says, so what happens now with this Rasha Be'emes? So the next section is going to explain that he too can do tshuva. It's not meaning that he's all lost and irredeemable. In his present state, the divine has been buried and become dormant within that person, but he could always transform himself. Because nothing stops tshuva. But there's another point. In explaining that it's not just that Karev Ma'id is not applicable to him, the Alter Rebbe goes further first and explains that the extent that he's fallen is unfortunately not just that he doesn't have access to controlling his heart. Until he doesn't do tshuva, it's not capable of him to really serve Hashem properly. So even though he is responsible for Torah mitzvahs, sporadically or however it works with him, but he has to go through a transformation for things to change. Because it's not just he's lost control over his heart and those desires, he's in a completely different state. So the Alter Rebbe continues now. Ki be'emesi efshel l'shem lahaskil l'aved Hashem. When it comes to Rasha be'emes, in truth, he can't begin to worship God in a consistent basis. We're not talking about sporadically, without first repenting for the past. Bli sheyaseh tshuva la'ovet tchila. So now we have two things here. Firstly, it's not just in actuality he doesn't control his emotions and desires. He needs serious work. He needs serious healing, which will come through repentance. Because he can't begin to serve God properly and consistently without that tshuva. On the other hand, we learned that tshuva will work. And when he'll do that tshuva, then he can reignite and re-trigger the power of Moich Shal Talev in a consistent manner. So this is why we say, the Rebbe explains, that we say Efshel Hashem Haskell Avad Hashem obviously does not mean at all he can't do Torah mitzvahs, like we mentioned, he's responsible to do it. And you can even see on a daily basis, Rasha Be'emes can also do mitzvahs, can also serve God to some extent. But to say in a consistent manner that he changes his whole state, an addict, like I said before, could also refrain and at times be very noble, actually. We see this all the time. But we're talking about changing his status. As long as he stays in the state of Rasha Be'emes, he cannot really serve God in an internal and integrated way and feel godliness, belavavcha in his heart, and especially in his heart and his emotions. Even if he could control beficha la'aseh, his words and his actions, there he needs tshuva. And what does the tshuva do? The tshuva is a true healing process. As he continues, the Alter Rebbe, L'shaber haklipa shehem mosach mavdil u'mechitza shel barzel hamafsekes beinom lavim shebeshamayim. So here now he explains also why Godel Aveinom, what he said, Godel ve'etzem Aveinom before, causes him to be trapped, not even able to access that faculty of self-control. So now the Alter Rebbe says clearly, the tshuva shatters the klippas, the shells. Think of the husks, the armor, which have shemosach, Klippas, Shem Mosach Mavdil. They've formed a type of partition or curtain. Mosach is a curtain or a partition that separates. And furthermore, Umechitza Shel Basil, and an iron wall, Hamafsekes, which interposes. So that's even stronger than Mavdil. Not just separates, but really creates a true gap between them and their Father in heaven. Beinam lavim shebashamayim. Citing the Gemara in Psachim 85b. So in a sense, they've now been taken captive, like held hostage, due to their sins. So the behavior, wicked behavior of a Rasha, using again the example of the addict, has in a way turned him into a different person. I remember, unfortunately, sadly, meeting a friend of mine who was in yeshiva with me, and he unfortunately got trapped in drug addiction. And literally you could see, I saw, he was like a shadow of himself, like a skeleton. It was his hollow eyes. His whole being changed. So this type of behavior actually, in many ways, erodes and deteriorates the very human being on so many levels. Obviously, mostly psychological and emotional, but also physically. So that's why you need the tshuva to break through and shatter this armor, this trap, this shell that he's trapped in, to free him from that captivity. And to free him from the desensitization that he has experienced due to this behavior. So here you see the Alter Rebbe literally talking about a situation that unfortunately we see even today in different forms and fashions. Then he's going to go on to explain, how does one break it? There's an Aveda. It's not just breaking with a hammer. We're talking here an Aveda that's necessary. What is this Aveda Satshuva? So he's going to explain like this. How do you break it? So you need to have feeling of heartbroken and embittered, through feeling heartbroken and embittered in their souls over their sins. You have to redevelop sensitivity and realize that what you're doing is really destructive. Remember, awareness is half the cure. The problem with an addict, someone that falls in such a trap, is that he's not even aware. So first he has to feel, how far have I fallen? That heartbreak and the shvira sleepy. He has to. So just like the how do you shatter armor? By breaking it. How do you break it? Heartbreak and bitterment and b'ridas nafshi al chatov. That's what does it. And then he's going to go on to explain, bring the Zohar and explain it more in detail. But we'll stop here. So the good news is even a Rosh Hashanah can break through and reclaim his humanity, his divinity, his neshama. And we'll learn that more. We'll learn more about that in the next class. A good tavach called Tuv, TanyaApplied.com, where you can find this and all previous programs, as well as ask any question that you may have. Thank you very much.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.